We are ninth lit, starting to read about the monk, and we just summarized. So far, I think we've looked at 4 people, and the best people we've seen was a military guy. The worst person we've seen is a nun, and she's not extremely bad. She's just not good. She's not doing what nuns should do. Well, it's gonna go downhill from now on. So we're gonna start. Why don't we start with Lolani? Lolani, you're going to read about this monk. At least read a paragraph, and then you can share it with Sawyer to read the second. So let's read about this monk.
Amongst there was one of the finest sort and very big hunting was his sport. A manly man who our able. Many a dainty horse he had in stable. His bride when he rode, a man might hear jingling in the whistling wind as clear. And loud as birds the falcon fell, where my lord monk was fire of the soul. The rule of good Saint Benedict, or Saint
Probably more.
as old and strict, intended to the yet those are the things of yesterday, and took the bottom line, not to he did not read that text at the text end. He said that people are not holy men, and that is not time that sacred is a mere piece of the bobbing on the field. That is to say, a knock out of his foot. There was a text he held not worthy of boasting, and I agreed and said his views were sound. Was he to study till the text might round, poring over books on foot? Must he toil as Austin did and fill up the years days? Was he to leave the world upon the shelf? Let Austin have his labor to himself.
First of all, and we've got to answer the first question, and then Sawyer will read. But it isn't the first question, but it's my first question. What is a limiter? It says he was a limiter. The monk, no, it's not. Sorry, got the wrong guy. You don't have to worry about that. But what do we know about him? What do we know about this man? We know what his favorite sport is. What is it? He was a hunter, okay? And it mentions something about hunting I thought was interesting. It says he did not rate that text at a plucked hen, which says that hunters are not holy men. You know anything about what the Bible said about hunters? You ever heard of a character in the Bible, a person named Nimrod? One of my sons had a football coach who, when he was aggravated at his players, would call them Nimrod. And when I mentioned that name, somebody says, I forget what they said, but somebody in my generation might have called him a knucklehead. It's not a term of affection, and it's trying to sort of put you down. I don't know why Nimrod has that reputation, but let me read you about Nimrod, okay? This is from Genesis 10. Cush fathered Nimrod. You ever heard of him? You ever heard of Nimrod? Okay. Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. So that's a pretty good start. I mean, that's a pretty good position to have. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. And then it mentions him again, or alludes to him again with the Tower of Babel. But Nimrod was a hunter, and for some reason, because of that, and Nimrod wasn't one of the good guys in the Bible, hunters are not holy men. I guess that's the reference. But just remember who Nimrod was, and we'll go to Sawyer. Let's see if there's anything else. Do you know what monks do? They do similar things as nuns. I know you will spend some time learning about monks. Anybody know about monks? Never known a monk. I'm sure we still have monks, yeah.
Like they live in a like an abbey or
monastery?
Yeah, monastery, like together with like a bunch of other monks, and they like read God's text, and they like spend most of their time like praying, meditating like on the words and stuff.
Right, and you'll see none of that in this description of this monk. Just like you didn't see anything about God or about poor people in the description of the nun. So here's a guy, it even mentions he doesn't do that. He doesn't go into his small room and pray because he's a hunter. He's outside a lot.
What's 10?
Would you read it?
What does this statement mean? He let go by the things of yesterday and took the modern world a more spacious way. Is this a Christian meaningful philosophy display?
All right, so I'm glad you brought that up. What do you think that's a reference to? He took the modern world's more spacious way. You know, did anybody in the Bible say anything about a way, a road?
Oh,
I am
he
the
said
way, the truth.
like the road to hell is wide, but the road to heaven is narrow.
That's very, very true. Jesus said that. That the road to heaven is very narrow, the road to hell, you said, is very wide. He takes the wide way. That is, he believes in the wide road. So, Sarah, what do you think that says about him?
That,
Spiritually.
He spiritually doesn't believe in God. He's not trying to be a good monk. He's just enjoying the world.
Exactly. He's another worldly person in the church, just like the nun. And so, Story's going to read more about the monk.
This monk was therefore a good man of horse. Greyhounds he had as swift as birds to court. Hunting a hare or riding at a fence was all his fun. He spared from no expense. I saw his sleeves were garnished at the hand with fine gray fur, the finest in the world. And on his hood to fasten it at his chin, he had a wrought gold cunningly fashioned pin. Into a lover's knot it seemed to pass. His head was bald and shone like looking glass. So did his face as if it had been greased. He was a fat, impersonable priest. His prominent eyeballs never seemed to settle. They glittered like the flames beneath a kettle. So supple his boots, his horse in fine condition. He was a prelate fit for exhibition. He was now pale like a tormented soul. He liked the fat swan best and roasted whole. His palfrey was as brown as is a berry.
And that's a kind of horse, a palfrey. So what can we tell about his appearance, including his what he wears? What does it say about his appearance? Yeah, Dan.
Well, it talks about like how like the stuff he has is like a lot nicer, and usually monks are like simple people and like don't have stuff, and talks about like a gold.
Well, monks aren't. You said sinful. They're aware of their sin.
Yeah.
And so everybody's a sinful person. It's just that monks are confessing they care about that. And you're saying this guy does not, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
He just seems like he's like, his eyes are really bulging and his head's like he's there.
It does say that. I'm not sure what that looks like or what that means, but bulging eyeballs, that's interesting. Yeah.
It kind of seems like the way like dresses and stuff is very like outgoing and very different from the monks. From why like monks are wearing just like kind of like black robes and stuff like that.
Exactly. He wears expensive clothes. It says, I saw his sleeves were garnished at the hand with fine gray fur, the finest in the land. So what he was wearing was the finest fur in England. Was he big or is he small?
He was large and bald.
Which means what? At least the large part.
Ate a lot of rich.
Which means what?
He was
That's right.
He was wealthy, yeah. So his dress, he also is personable, which means he's affable, he liked people, he liked to be around people. Say he was fit for exhibition. You know, in other words, what he looked like was what he was fit for, not for spiritual warfare against the prince of hell. That's what monks are signing up for. Now this guy is fit to be put on exhibition, walk on a runway so people can look at him. That's not the kind of monks we need. Now we get to the friar. Do you know anything about friars? Yeah, he was a friar. This is what I figured out friars, and I don't know much. Wish I knew more. But friars were, what's the word? Para-church. You ever heard that expression? Like, I became a Christian because of Campus Crusade for Christ. I think it's now called Cru in college. But anyway, it was a para. It didn't belong to any church. It wasn't a Presbyterian deal. It wasn't a Baptist deal. It was separate from the church. It didn't have the authority of the church. What am I trying to say? The institutional church. So friars didn't work for the church. Monks and nuns did. They got paid, and they lived there, so they got taken care of. But friars they didn't work for the church. And so they don't make things, they don't sell things. So how do they get money? They beg for it. And so all friars, there are 4 orders of friars. You don't need to know this, but there are Dominicans, Franciscan, Carmelite, and Austin. These are 4 orders of friars. And they were beggars. And so it says he was a limiter. You'll see that in the second line. And Aiden's going to read this. A limiter means he was limited to a particular place to beg. It used to be in Greensboro that if you wanted to go out and make a living by begging, you had to be licensed. They usually wore something like this, that said they were licensed. And they were limited to a particular spot. Like that's why you might see the same guy or girl or woman at the same intersection all the time, because they were required to stay in one spot. I think they changed that rule several years ago. But that's what these friars do. All right. So that is Aiden is going to read. If you want to read the whole thing, you may. Otherwise, you can read part of it, half of it, and then give it to whoever. No, yeah, give it to Ben. Ben will do it for you if you want to. You can read it all if you want to.
Alright. There was a friar, a wanton one, and Mary a limiter, a very festive fellow. In all 4 orders there was none so mellow, so glib with gallant phrase and well-turned speech. He fixed up many a marriage, giving each of his young women what he could afford her. He was a noble pillar to his order, highly beloved and intimate was he with country folk within his boundary, and city dames of honor and possessions, for he was qualified to hear confessions. So he said, with more than priestly skill, he had a special license from the Pope. Sweetly he heard his penitence at shrift, with pleasant absolution for a gift. He was an easy man in penance giving, and he could hope to make a decent living. It's a sure sign whenever gifts are given to a poor order that a man's well striven, and should he give enough to new and varied. The penitent repented, and sincerity for many a fellow is so hard of heart, he cannot weep for all his inward smart. Therefore, instead of weeping in a prayer, one should give silver for a poor friar's care. He kept his tippet stuffed with pence for curls, and pocket knives to give to pretty girls. And certainly his voice was gay and sturdy, for he sang well and played with the hurdy-gurdy. At sing-songs he was champion of the hour. His neck was wider than a lily flower, but strong enough to butt a bruiser down. He knew the taverns well in every town, and every innkeeper and barmaid too, better than the lepers, beggars, and that crew. For in so eminent as a man he was, it was not fitting with the dignity of his position dealing with the scum of wretched lepers. Nothing good can come of commerce with such slum and gutter dwellers, but only with the rich and victual sellers. But anywhere a profit might accrue, courteous he was and lowly of service too. Natural gifts like his were hard to match. He He was the finest beggar of his batch, and for his begging district paid a rent, and prevented not poaching where he wanted.
All right, then why don't you just go ahead and finish for him at top of 10.
For though a widow might eat cow's shoes, so pleasant was his holy how do you do. He got his farthing from her just the same before he left, and so his income came to more than he laid out. And how he romped just like a puppy. He was never prompt to arbitrate disputes on settling days, in many helpful ways. Not then appearing as your cloistered scholar, with threadbare habit hardly worth a dollar, but much more like a doctor or a pope, of double worsted was the semitope upon his shoulders, and swelling fold about him, like a bell about its mold when it is casting, rounded out his dress. He lisped a little out of wantonness to make his English sweet upon his tongue. When he had played his harp or having sung, his eyes would twinkle in his head as bright as any star upon a frosty night. This worthy's name was Hubert, it appeared.
All right, we have a name, Hubert. They're not all given names, and I don't know why we get some names and not all names. I know one reason, because their names aren't what's important. It's their occupation that's important. The names particularize them too much. A friar, that's pretty broad. And so this friar is supposed to represent a lot of friars. All right, let's go back to this guy. He is a limiter. What else do you know about him? There are 4 or 5 things that are pretty prominent. They've been repeated several times. Yes?
Well, he kind of only deals with the wealthy. You said that he doesn't get anything from working with poor people.
Yeah, a beggar wouldn't beg from poor people, would he or she? No, it made no sense. So he goes to wealthy people to beg. But he doesn't only beg, he offers them absolution for their sins. He is not a friar. I mean, he is not a monk or a priest. He doesn't have the right, according to the church, to absolve you of your sin. And yet that's what he's doing. He claimed the Pope gave him a special license to do it. But he'll hear your confession and forgive you if you'll do what for him?
Pay him.
Pay him. What do you call somebody like that? A con man. These are con men. He's a con man. He makes people, you know why they call him con men? Did we talk about that?
Cause con means
Like pro and con.
like a Kubla con.
Neither one of us are right, but I like your thinking. I even thought at one time it meant convict. You know, like that's a bad thing. Con men are a bad thing. You know, it comes from the word confidence. Because what does a con man do? He gets your confidence in him, and then he cheats you. So he has to develop your confidence or bring out your confidence. You trust him, and then he steals from you. That's why they're called con men. And that's what this guy is. What else is he? And that's terrible. In the name of God, I forgive you, but here's $20. You better give me $20. What do you mean?
Well, like, basically,
You said he was a player.
yeah, it's like,
That's his word, not mine.
like he gives gifts to girls and stuff, and he sings and plays instruments.
So he flirts with girls, young girls. Well, it says pretty girls, doesn't say young girls. He says he fixed up many a marriage. I'm not sure what that means, except it sounds like maybe giving each of his young women what he could afford. It's almost like he marries a lot of people. He just marries people. You know, you can't marry but one person in most cultures. Peace child being an exception. But this guy, he just marries whoever. It even called him wanton. I think that's a word you need to know. W-A-N-T-O-N. It means immoral or lewd. So he's sexually immoral. He's a con man. and he claims to work for the church and represent Christ. So it's one thing to be a nun or a monk in this case. They were worldly, but he didn't try to hurt people. This guy hurts people. He steals from them. He cheats them. He claims to be something he's not. So you're right, he does sing, and he flirts with girls. He only deals, as Taylor said, with rich and not with poor. Poor people aren't going to give any money. They don't have it.
What was the part about the limiter again?
He's limited to a particular location in order to beg. Let's see if there's anything else different. It says that he would go to a widow and cheat her out of money. Widows are like the lowest because they have nobody to take care of them. And yet he would cheat them instead of helping them, like the Bible says. He would cheat them. That's awful. He wore nice clothes. So, I mean, you can put, there's 3 or 4 things there that you can say about him. He's a terrible person. And what does it say about the church in the Middle Ages? These are people that work for the church.
It means that it's corrupt.
Right. You are kind of, any institution is known by the people that work for it, right? We're known by you and by teachers. I mean, this reputation of Caldwell is because people know you and they know the people like us who teach. And if we did what this friar and this monk and this nun did, people would get the impression we were corrupt. That's why we're trying our best not to give that impression by not being corrupt, by being the real deal. We believe this, what we're saying, and hopefully we live it. Now we're going to look, we only have a few minutes left, we're going to look at a couple of non-church jobs, actually 3. One's a merchant, one's a student, and one is a lawyer. Now the student's not really a job, right? But he's in this list. So let's look at Ben. He's going to read about the merchant.
There was a merchant with a forking beard and motley dress. High on his horse he sat, upon his head a Flemish beaver hat, and upon his feet dangling buckled boots. He told of his opinion and pursuits in solemn tones. He harped on his increase of capital. There should be sea police, he thought, upon the Harwich Holland ranges. He was expert at dabbling in exchanges. This estimable merchant so had set his wits to work. None knew he was in debt. He was so stately in administration, in loans and bargains and negotiation. He was an excellent fellow, all the same. To tell the truth, I do not know his name.
So just a couple of things about him. What could you say about him? Yes.
He's in debt, and he's good.
What'd you say?
He's in debt.
Right, and that seems to be in this context a negative criticism. He's a merchant, and most people are in debt. Most people have a mortgage. They maybe car payments. Your parents probably do. Most people do. It becomes a problem if you have high debts, like credit card debts. Then it becomes a real problem. But in some cultures, I guess the Middle Ages, it wasn't good to be in debt at all, and so he was ashamed of it. He didn't let people know. And somehow Chaucer found out. What else can you say about him? Yeah.
He's a good person.
He was probably a good merchant, and you said a good person. He was, he had opinions. He didn't mind expressing his opinion. He was an excellent fellow. And so one thing you should note about all of these people, most of them, but not all of them, have flaws. And some of them are not what they appear to be, kind of like people in real life. You can only tell by first impressions and appearances so much. You really can't tell everything you need to know. So let's move to Luke. A cleric is a student, and it's particularly Yeah, I think it's a church student, but still, he's a student, he doesn't really have a job. Yeah. Can you wait for him to finish, or?
In Oxford, clerics, still a student though, who had taken long ago, was there, his horse was thinner than a rug, and he was not too fat to undertake, but had a hollow look, a somber stare, the thread upon his overcoat was bare. He had found no preferment in the church, and had no too worthily to make search, and for secure employment by his bed, he had preferred 20 books in red and black of Aristotle, philosophy, then costly clothes, fiddle, or psaltery, though of some, and wait,
A philosopher.
philosopher, as I had told, he had not found the stone. He had not found the stone for making gold, whatever money for his brilliance he took, he spent on learning, or another book. He and prayed for them most earnestly, returning thanks to them thus for praying for the learning. His only care was study, and indeed he never spoke a word more than was needed. Formal at that respect, and the extreme short to the point, and lofty in his name. A tone of morale, virtue filled his spirit, and gladly would he learn and gladly teach.
I think we could divide the people into three groups, the good guys, the bad guys, and the guys that are kind of neutral, and guys, I mean girls and guys. I don't know where you would put him. What do we know about him? Yeah.
He is,
He and
Sure.
his horse are underweight, are skinny, so that means he's probably not wealthy.
He's not wealthy because he doesn't eat a lot, because he doesn't have enough money, because what does he do with what little money he does have?
Buys books.
he pays
Man
for his
after my
learning.
own heart, what?
He pays for his learnings.
Yeah, and if you would have to give him money that he would use to buy a book, he would be grateful for it. So far, so good. You kinda have to admire the guy. He likes to learn, he's unworldly.
Also a teacher.
What?
He would teach people too.
Right. So he's not worldly like the monk and the nun. That's probably a compliment. And we already said he was thin, but notice how it said he was not too fat. What literary device is that?
It's to double entendre.
What? No.
No.
It's the under exaggeration.
Right, what's it called? Latodes.
Latodes.
When you say he's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
something, you say the opposite, he's fat. No, he's not fat or not too fat. In order to say something positive. You say something negative to say something positive. I'd put him in the good guy list. And so we'll go to Carter.
A surgeon at the law who paid his call, worrying wise for clients at St. Paul's. There also was a noted excellence, discreet he was, a man to reverence. Or so he seemed, his sayings were so wise, he often had been justice of
Aside.
By letters, patent, and in full commission, his fame and learning and his high position had won him many a robe and many a fee. There was no such conveyancer as he. All must be simple and his strong to his strong digestion. Not one conveyance
Conveyance.
could be called in question. Though there was nowhere one so busy as he was less busy than he seemed to be. He knew of every judgment, case, and crime ever recorded since King William's time. He could dedicate defenses or draft deeds. No one could pinch a comma from his phrase. And he knew every statute off by rote. He wore a homely parti-colored coat, girt with the silken belt of spring strip stuff. Of his appearance I have said.
He's a lawyer. It says sergeant at law, but that's, I don't know why they call that. A sergeant, well, it really comes from the word servant. So I don't know what position, but he is a lawyer. We'll just say that. What kind of lawyer? What do we know about him?
He was well informed.
He was what?
I think he was smart, he knew a lot about the cases and stuff.
So he was probably a good lawyer. He did his job well. He knew his stuff. Yeah.
He knew like he studied so much, he knew like every single
Right.
crime.
He was really good. But usually there's something negative. I didn't see anything negative about the cleric, but what about this guy? You see anything negative that said he was busy, but not as busy as he seemed to be? So he's trying to give the appearance of something that's not completely true. I don't know why he's doing that, yeah.
He just acts kind of above and smarter than everybody.
Say that again.
He seems like he acts above and smarter than everybody.
All right, that could be a part of the deal. It said discreet, he was a man to reverence, or so he seemed. His sayings were so wide. So whenever you see the word seem, that's a little different than is. Seemed means it has the appearance of, but it may not be. And so he's a good lawyer, successful lawyer, but maybe he's hiding something, that he's not as busy. And he says a homely party colored coat. I don't know if that means he's not wealthy. And we'll do one more here. We'll let Sarah do it. If you need to go. All right, so Sarah, page 12.
There was a Franklin with him, it appeared. White as a daisy petal was his name. A sanguine man, high colored and benign, who loved the morning salt of cake and wine, who lived for pleasure and had always done, for he was Epicurus' very son, and whose opinion sensual delight was the one true fallacy in sight, as noted as Saint Julian was for Browning. He made his household free to all the county. His bread and his ale were finest of the fine, and no one had a better stock of wine. His house was never short of baked meat pies, of fish and flesh, of those and such supplies, and positively snowed with meat and drink, and all the dainties that a man could bank. According to the seasons of the year, changes of dish were ordered to appear. He kept fat partridges in the coops, beyond many a bream of pipes in his pond. Woe to the cook unless the sauce was hot and sharp, or if he wasn't on the spot. And in his hall a table stood arrayed, and ready all day long with places laid. As justice in the sessions none stood higher, he often had been member of the shire, for the shire. A dagger and a little purse of silk hung at his girdle, white as morning milk. As sheriff he checked audits every entry. He was a model among landed gentry.
Good. So Franklin, first you have to, one of the questions I'm going to ask you is what does the occupation mean? Here's like yeoman. You didn't know what yeoman meant. Franklin is also one you may not know. Did you have a question before we get to that? Okay, here's what a Franklin was. It was a free landowner, but wasn't noble. Sounds like the Franklin was a higher position status than the yeoman. Yeoman was a small farm owner. This man is free, which means he's not a vassal of anybody, and but he wasn't a noble either. He wasn't served this or that. So what can we say about this Franklin? What was the most important thing to him?
Earthly pleasure.
Yeah, earthly pleasure. Do you know who Epicurus was? I don't remember much myself, but I can tell you what an Epicurean is. An Epicurean, which was someone who had sensitive and discriminating tastes in wine and food. So he's a lover of pleasure, but he was like an expert in wine and food. You've seen people like that, that's an Epicurean. We connoisseur, what?
Go ahead and shake it off himself. And he laughs.
Oh, how do you know?
I didn't hear most of
All
it.
right.
He's
No.
talking about like all the different techniques to drink wine or something.
I wouldn't know.
I don't drink.
So, he loves that. He loves like the finer taste in wine and food. So far, I mean, I don't know if that's a virtue or not, but do you see a virtue in the man? What else does it say about him? Yeah,
He seems like a good host,
yes, wow.
because he's always ready to like have people over and eat food with them.
Anybody that's generous, that is a virtue. Generosity is a virtue. When you give lavishly, when you give generously, that's a good thing. I think sometimes we've forgotten even what are the virtues. We don't hear enough about virtues to know what's good and what's bad. We're not even allowed to say what's good and bad anymore in some circles in the world. But it's clear that generosity has always been a virtue. Yeah.
It's like, he says he also has like a lot of partridges and like a lot of fish and ponds and stuff.
Well, because he's successful. He owns land and he has a variety of, has an abundance of food and he's generous with it. I kinda like the guy. Go back to the top. I don't know if this is one of your words or not. I'll assign this tomorrow. Look at the word in the third line about the Franklin. It says a sanguine man. You see that word? Is that one of our words? I don't think so. But I want to give you a definition of it. Sanguine means
Same paradise.
confident, cheerful, optimistic. And we're gonna look at this later because it's something that was believed in the Middle Ages. You see Shakespeare referred to it. You ever heard of the four humors? The four humors, H-U-M-O-R-S or O-U-R-S. Anyway, basically your personality could be determined by how much of certain fluids you had in your body. Now, there were four fluids, like blood and phlegm and bile, and there's another one. Anyway, our body has these four fluids, and depending on which kind of, it's one of those four might dominate. So if the blood dominates, you would be sanguine, and I don't, it sounds like superstition to me, and it probably is. But there are four good words we'll learn from those four humors, and one of them is sanguine, means happy, confident, and he's that way. All right, so good start. You should be reading for next Monday, and you should be working on the H lines. Anybody? I'm not going to ask you to do it, but could anybody stand up right now and do the 8 lines? All right. Well, we don't have time anyway, so keep working at it, and you will on Thursday. See you later.